Welcome and thank you for joining me for the report for day 406 of the war in Ukraine. You are listening to The Account. Today I have one extra segment about President Zelensky's visit to Poland. All other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and international developments. Before we start the news, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. Heavy battles and artillery duels are reported as Russian assaults inside Bakhmut continue. The situation remains critical for Ukrainian defenders. Wagner claimed several advances today around the city center and hospital area. The deep state map shows everything east of the railroad as either contested or Russian-controlled. Avdiivka. Sources from both sides report about small successful Ukrainian counteroffensives to improve tactical positions. One area recaptured was northwest of Novoselivka. Russian attempts to encircle the settlement continue to fail. Igor Girkin claimed that the front line around Avdiivka has become bogged down again. To start the news segment, the updates on Ukrainian President Zelensky's visit to Poland. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived on an official visit to Poland today. This is the first time since the full-scale war started that a visit by the Ukrainian president has been announced in advance. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky and First Lady of Ukraine Olena Zelenska have arrived at the presidential palace in Warsaw, where they were greeted by President of the Republic of Poland Andrzej Duda and First Lady of the Republic of Poland Agata Kornhauser-Duda. Duda awarded Zelensky with Poland's highest decoration, the Order of the White Eagle. During a joint press conference, Polish President Andrzej Duda said that his country has already prepared 8 more MiG-29 fighter jets to be transferred to Ukraine, and that his country will work on obtaining additional security guarantees for Ukraine at the upcoming NATO summit in Vilnius in July this year. President Zelensky confirmed during the conference that the situation in the city of Bakhmut in Donetsk Oblast is extremely complicated, but Russia does not control the city yet. He also explained that Ukraine will not accept any compromises on its road to NATO membership. The representatives of Ukraine and Poland have signed a separate document on cooperation in reconstruction. President Zelensky further asked Polish investors to help in the reconstruction effort of Ukraine. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. The Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister for Restoration, Communities, Territories and Infrastructure Development Minister Oleksandr Kubrakov stated after a meeting with German Vice-Chancellor, Federal Minister for Economic Affairs and Climate Action Robert Habeck, and Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to Ukraine Anka Feldhusen, that German companies are willing to contribute to the reconstruction of the Ukrainian energy grid heavily damaged by Russian attacks. Arvydas Anušauskas, Defense Minister of Lithuania, has visited the city of Kharkiv today. Russia has targeted facilities of Ukraine's state defense conglomerate Ukroboronprom more than 150 times since the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, the General Director Yuri Husiev said. Lieutenant General Serhiy Nayev, commander of the Joint Forces, has shown off the US-supplied Avenger anti-aircraft air defense system operating in Ukraine. Nayev added that the air defense can quickly detect and destroy Iranian-made Shahed kamikaze drones. A giant screen has been installed at the Ukrainian-Belarusian border, broadcasting footage from Bucha and an address by Ukrainian President Zelensky. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. As reported by the National Resistance Center, Iranian goods appeared in shops in the temporarily occupied territories of the Luhansk Oblast. Once again, an explosion was reported in occupied Melitopol by Ivan Fedorov, the mayor of Melitopol. Fedorov further stated that a collaborator lost limbs in the April 3rd explosion, while today's explosion is still being investigated. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Currently, there are 15 Russian warships on active combat duty in the Black Sea. 6 of them are missile carriers with a total salvo of up to 40 cruise missiles. Unnamed Western officials stated that the Kremlin has a problem in generating military manpower. However, it also fears a new wave of mobilization in Russia due to the current mood of the population. Maria Lvova-Belova, the Russian ombudswoman for children's rights, has claimed publicly that a teenage boy from the temporarily occupied city of Mariupol, whom she has adopted, had been influenced by Ukrainian propaganda, but in spite of that, he is already calling her mom. Russian President Vladimir Putin, during a meeting of the Russian Security Council, stated that everything must be done to integrate the occupied territories of Ukraine into the Russian legal space as quickly as possible. During the meeting, Putin further claimed that Kyiv spares no one and regularly arranges terrorist attacks. He called the situation in the occupied territories tense and warned that Western intelligence services were involved in terrorist attacks inside the so-called new territories of Russia. Putin also instructed authorities to fight hard against the unfinished underground and demand a tough suppression of neo-Nazi propaganda in the new regions. A fire broke out in one of the buildings of the Russian Ministry of Defense in the center of Moscow. On the eve of the meeting of the Supreme State Council of the Union State, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko arrived at the Kremlin for a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The UK has blocked Russian Children's Rights Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova from speaking at an informal meeting of the UN Security Council regarding the forced deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. A quote from the UK representative in the UN Security Council. If she wants to give an account of her actions, she can go do so in The Hague. The Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has called for a reform of the UN Security Council's structure, saying that the current model is unsustainable. China's ambassador to the European Union, Fu Kong, downplayed the statements about no limits to friendship between China and Russia as nothing but rhetoric. The Chinese ambassador added that the relationship between Beijing and Moscow has been deliberately misinterpreted. The 11th meeting of the Contact Group of the Defense of Ukraine, also known as the Ramstein meetings, will again take place at the US Air Base in Ramstein. 49 countries and the European Union have signed a joint statement condemning Russia's abuse of powers and privileges as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting as usual with the UK Ministry of Defense. On March 28, 2023, Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin said that a move to issuing some of Russia's sovereign debt in foreign currencies was under development. The move is almost certainly an indication that Russia anticipates external financial support from foreign states it deems friendly. Once the development is completed, investors from other countries will be able to purchase Russian sovereign debt and therefore finance some of Russia's future budget shortfalls. Such investors would be indirectly financing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In recent months, Russia's own banks have been the main entities purchasing Russian state debt. However, they are unlikely to have the capacity to fully fund anticipated future budget deficits. Russian officials likely see external debt issuance as one way to plug gaps in Russia's finances as they plan for a long war in Ukraine. However, it remains unclear whether Russia will succeed in implementing the measures. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The Kremlin will likely attempt to coerce Belarus into further Union state integration when Russian President Vladimir Putin and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko meet in Moscow on April 5th and 6th. The Kremlin continues to attempt to employ nuclear threats to deter Western military aid provisions to Ukraine ahead of Ukraine's planned counteroffensive. Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin's demonstrative response to the assassination of Russian mill blogger Maxim Fomin, Vladlen Tatarsky, indicates Prigozhin likely believes that the attack was in part directed at himself. Prigozhin promised to offer financial compensation to those who attended the event. He also hinted that Wagner has been thwarting attempts to eliminate the group since 2014. The Kremlin continued efforts to falsely reassure the Russian public that the war in Ukraine will not have significant long-term economic consequences. Russian President Vladimir Putin held a State Council Presidium meeting on April 4th to discuss developing Russian industry in the face of sanctions pressure, during which he claimed that sanctions are having positive outcomes by forcing Russian companies to embrace import substitution. This is an argument the Kremlin has made sporadically since the 2014 annexation of Crimea, the institute stated. The Kremlin is likely trying to shift responsibility for expanding Russian industry onto regional bodies to insulate itself from possible criticism about Russia's deteriorating economic situation. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy continues to focus its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka directions. More than 40 attacks by the invaders were repulsed during the day. The settlements of Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka remain at the epicenter of hostilities. In the Liman direction, the enemy conducted unsuccessful offensive actions in the areas of the settlement of Nevske and Zerebryansk forest. In the direction of Bakhmut, the enemy is trying to take full control of the city of Bakhmut and continues to storm it. The enemy led unsuccessful offensive actions near Bodanivka and Ivanivske. In the Avdiivka and Marinka directions, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the areas of Novokalinovo, Avdiivka and Marinka. In the Zaporizhia and Kherson directions, the enemy is building up defensive lines and positions in terms of fortification. The Russian occupiers are strengthening the counterintelligence and police regime in the temporarily occupied territory of the Kherson Oblast. In particular, in the Kakhovsky district, since March 23rd of this year, the armed forces of the Russian Federation have been carrying out raids to check the personal phones of the local population for the presence of photo and video materials, as well as forbidden content. During such inspections, the occupiers search the homes of local residents. First of all, those who make phone calls to free Ukraine are subject to inspection. And with that, another report is finished. If you're interested in any of the articles I mentioned and want to read up on the details, you can find links in the description. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.